Good morning, fourth year students. Today we are going to talk about the types of test and specifically the types of the language test. Okay, so how do we classify tests into types or into categories? In fact, tests are divided into types or categories depending on their distinctive features. We know that tests should have a purpose. As a teacher, in order to make or conduct a test for your students, you should have in mind an objective to achieve, okay? A purpose that you want to arrive at. So the first feature of the test, a good test, it should have a specific objective. Then the test should be based on on content. The questions that you are going to put in your test should reflect the content that you have taught to your students. So the second feature is what the content of the test. Number three, the test has what results, okay, and these results need interpretation. So according to which criterion you are going to interpret the results of your test is the third feature of your test. Then this test also what needs or should be what scored. After your students take the test, you should collect their answer sheets and score them. The way that the teacher follows in scoring the papers or the answer sheets of his students or her students also can make for us types of tests. Is it clear? And finally, which is the fifth feature of the test, is what tests are designed or are conducted, are made, are constructed in certain ways. So also, or in certain methods. So also the method in which that you are going to make the test for your students can generate for you different types of tests. Is it clear? So according to these five features, which are the purpose of the test, the content of the test, the way of scoring the test, the way of interpreting the results of the test, the way that you are going to make the test for your students, all these features of the test are going to be used, to be adopted in classifying the language test in particular into different types. Okay, so if we start with the first feature of the test, which is related to what? To the purpose of the test. So according to the purpose of the test, we are going to have 9 types of tests. The first 6 ones are said to be the most common ones. Okay, so if we are talking about the proficiency test, the achievement test, the progress test, the diagnostic test, the placement test, and the aptitude test. These are the most common ones or types of tests that are used in our language or for learning and teaching foreign language context. The last 3 ones, okay, are said to be what the least common ones. And here we are talking about what? About the selection test, the evaluation test, and the accreditation test. Okay, so here we are going to talk about, for instance, the proficiency test. What is the purpose of the proficiency test? The proficiency test provides measures of students' overall competence in language. So here we are after checking out the overall ability or the overall knowledge that these candidates have about language. Consequently, the proficiency test is not based on any content. So the student who has applied to have a proficiency test is not necessarily that he has studied a course prior to the test. Is it clear? So the first feature of the proficiency test, it is not based on a specific content or a specific course. Its purpose is to measure the overall competence, the overall ability of the candidate in language. Okay, it is also number 3, the third feature of the proficiency test. It is said to be a summative, or it is known to be a summative test, because here the student or the candidate is expecting that you give him or her a score. Okay, and it is a norm reference test. How do we interpret the result of the test? We interpret the result of the test, the score that the students or the candidates have, depending on a norm. What is this norm? It is the group or the scores that a similar group of students have already taken in this test. Is it clear? And finally, it is what a not diagnostic test. So this test is not conducted for diagnostic purposes. We are not after finding out the strengths or weaknesses of the students who applied or who have taken this test. Is it clear? We are after what? As we said, measuring their general ability in language, just like what? Just like the TOEFL. The components of the TOEFL, for instance, the components of the proficiency test in general, and the TOEFL as an example of such a proficiency test, is going to reflect all the components and the skills of language. So you can see questions in the form of what? In the form of multiple choice items, talking about different components of language: grammar, vocabulary, meaning, okay, reading, different skills, reading comprehension, listening comprehension, and even sometimes writing. If we go to the second type of test, which is what? The achievement test, or it is called the attainment test. Attainment also means what? Achievement, accomplishment. So what is the purpose of this test? The purpose is what? To provide information about students' attainment or achievement of the course outcomes at the end of the course or within the program. So from this we can understand that here the achievement test should be based on what? Should be based on a course that the students have already studied, okay, before taking what? Before taking the achievement test. Is it clear? So why do we make for them a test? We make for them a test in order to what? In order to measure the knowledge that they have got from studying the course, the development that they have made from the course that they have studied before. Is it clear? How much objectives, how much of the course objectives that have been achieved. Is it clear? And you see here they say that it is either made at the end of the course or within the program. So the achievement test can be both, can be what? A summative test and a formative test. It is a summative because you can make it or conduct it for your students at the end of the school year, at the end of the school program or a course. And here you have what? You have to correct these tests and give your students scores or marks. What about within the program? If you are doing or conducting the test during the program, here it is going to be what? Formative. Is it clear? Here you are checking the achievement that your students have achieved within or after you finish each unit, for example, in the book. So that here it is what? It is a formative test. Also, it can be what? It can have what? Diagnostic purposes. Throughout, especially making the test during the course, you can identify, you can be familiar, you can have an idea about the weaknesses and the strengths of your students, so that you are going to concentrate or focus on them in the next classes. If we go to the third type of test, which is the progress test, it provides information about the mastery or difficulty with course material. So it is somehow similar to the achievement test, to the formative type of the achievement test. Okay, why formative? Because here it is said that progress. Whenever you finish a unit or a topic in your course, okay, you can make a test for your students in order to check the progress that they have made, the development that has happened in their abilities, the knowledge that they have acquired from learning or teaching this unit for them. Also, it can be the progress test is what is based on a content that you as a teacher has already taught it for your students, and it can be also for diagnostic purposes, and it can include different formats, different types of questions related to the content that you have taught for them. Then we are talking about the diagnostic test. Mainly, as we said, we have already mentioned or said something about the diagnostic purposes of test, in which that you are after what identifying the strengths and weaknesses of your students, so that you may help them to work on their weaknesses in order to improve them. Okay. So here, for instance, if we are talking, for instance, you make a test in phonology and pronunciation for your students. This test will help you to identify the phonological features that of any language, if we say of English as an example, that are difficult for your learners and should therefore become part of the curriculum. Okay. A writing diagnostic test would tell you about, or will give you a writing sample of your students' performances and the mistakes, okay, that they have committed, the type of mistakes. You are going to be able to have an idea about the type of difficulties that they have in writing. Is it spelling difficult for them? Is it making the arranging the ideas difficult for them? Is it punctuation? So that you are going to focus on these things in the coming classes. So it is important here to distinguish between a diagnostic test and a general achievement test. Achievement tests analyze the extent to which students have acquired language features that have already been taught for them, while diagnostic tests elicit information on what students need to work on in the future. Is it clear? So you see here in the achievement test, you are doing it at the end of the course in order, mainly, okay, if we are talking about the summative, type of test, you are conducting it at the end of the course, or at the end of the unit, in order to identify the knowledge that they have got from the material that you have taught to them. The diagnostic test, your aim is to find out what they know and what they don't know in order to focus on them. So it is possible to conduct the diagnostic test at the beginning of the course. Okay, it is not of a great use if you are making the diagnostic test at the end of the course. So it is better to conduct the diagnostic test at the beginning of the course or during the course, in order to find out the problems or the difficulties that your students are having in language, so that you are going to make or design activities to help them overcome them and improve their performance in the future. Then we go to number 5, which is the placement test. So what is the placement test, or what is the purpose of the placement test? It identifies the students' level of language ability so as to be placed in the appropriate class or course. So here, placement test, again, It measures the general ability, the general knowledge, the overall competence that your students or certain candidates have about language for a purpose. What is this purpose? The purpose is to place them, okay, in a suitable level or in suitable course. That this level or course that you are going to place them in is going to be what suitable for their abilities. You have to make sure that the materials that they are going to learn within this course is not too easy and not too difficult, but they are going to be challenging. They are going to be useful for them to develop and improve their abilities. So when you are going to have a class of students who are similar in their levels and in their abilities in language, here you are creating a homogeneous class. And teaching a homogeneous class, teaching the students of the same level, will make it easier for you as a teacher, will you make your task as a teacher easier. Okay, so you are not teaching the students of different levels, and just like as we have in our classes in schools. Okay, so what about the diagnostic purposes of such a test? Is this diagnostic? Some scholars or some specialists in language tests, they say that yes, it can have a diagnostic purpose, because when you are making at the beginning of the course, making a test in order to identify the ability of those students in language, here also you are going to have an idea about what the things they know about language and what are the things that they do not know. Okay, so that you are going to concentrate to focus on the things that they don't know in order to improve them. Placement tests come in many varieties. I mean that they test what? Okay, what kind of questions that you are going to put in your placement test? You can assess comprehension and production. We can talk about what listening comprehension, reading comprehension. In terms of production, we can talk about writing, for instance, speaking. Okay, you can have multiple choice items assessing those students' ability in using grammar and using vocabulary items and so on. The placement tests, either they are made by the teachers themselves, or you as a teacher can use the already made or the already existent types of tests, such as the TOEFL. Yeah, you take a sample of the TOEFL, okay, test, and you give it for those students or those candidates as a placement test. And here you are going to save time. You are going to save what effort in making and preparing the test. You are going to save money. Is it clear? And even scoring, because we know that the TOEFL tests are scored or can be scored by using the computers. They can be scanned by the computers and not the teachers. So here you have two ways of conducting the test. Either you as a teacher can prepare or can construct the test, put the questions of the test, or you can use one of the already found or already existing forms of tests from the TOEFL exams. Number 6, we are going to talk about the aptitude test. The aptitude test aims at identifying the student's readiness or eligibility to learn a language. So before we talk about this test, we need to know what is aptitude. Aptitude, it is a linguistic and psychological term. It refers to the genuine, real ability that the individual has to learn the language. Okay, so before you allow certain candidates to join a course in, for example, in learning any language, English, French, German, any language, you need to know whether those students are going to succeed in this course or not, are really ready to learn the language, or they are going to waste your time and their time. Is it clear? So aptitude is, what does it mean, aptitude? Aptitude means the real ability that students have to learn the language. This ability, okay, is going to be made of three important things. What are they? Students should have what? Phonological ability, which means that they are related to detect to learn the sounds of the language, to learn how to pronounce them, to understand or recognize the phonetic differences between words, like in stress, intonation, vowel quality, and so on. Okay. Syntactic ability, which means that are they able to recognize the different grammatical functions or forms of words and sentences or not. Psychological ability, which means that what kind of activities that are suitable to those students in order to be effective in their learning. Okay, so this is what we mean by aptitude. We can now make a test for the students at the beginning or before joining a course in order to find out whether those students are ready to learn the language, are going to succeed in the course when they are going to join it or not. So what is this called? It is called what? Aptitude test. Okay. Some say that the aptitude test is not a new one. Okay, it is a classic one or traditional type of test. There are mainly two important aptitude tests that are found around the world. One of them is made in the United States, that is called the Model Language Aptitude Test, designed by Carroll and Sapin in 1958. You see, in 1958, it is too old. And the other one is the Brimsler Language Aptitude Battery that was designed in 1966. So you see, from the dates of the designing these tests, they told us that they are what old ones, and some maybe nowadays no one is what is adopting them or is making an aptitude test for candidates. So if you are making an aptitude test for your students, what kind of components that this test should have or should measure? It should measure, as we said, sound coding ability, because you remember the components of the aptitude. We talked about three components: phonological ability, syntactic ability, and psychological ability. So you are going to test these things in your test. So you are going to have questions about what? About sounds, questions about grammar, questions about meaning of the words. Is it clear? In order to find out whether they are able to remember or to guess or to find out the meaning of the words. Is it clear? Without the need to check the dictionary every time. Their ability to memorize things. Is it clear? So these are the four components that, or the four things that you should put in your mind when you are making the aptitude test. So as we said, these are the the first six and types of tests, which are said to be what? The most common ones. If we move to the last three ones, okay, we are going to talk about the selection test, which aims at selecting students to join certain colleges or programs of study. So if a group of students, a group of candidates want to apply to join a certain college or want to pursue their higher education, a test should be made for them, and specifically in language, in order to what? In order to find out whether they are able, whether they are ready, they are eligible to join this college or join this course or not. Evaluation test here. You are making a test not to evaluate, not to measure the ability of your students, but to evaluate the course that you have been teaching, the teaching method that you have been following, the teaching activities that you have designed for your students in order to find out whether they were effective or not, whether they need some sort of modification or not. Finally, we are going to talk about what the accreditation test, okay? And the accreditation test is what, or its aim is to give a proof that certain group of students have joined the course and passed this course, and so they are going to get this certificate. Just like you, after at the end of this year, after having your exams, and when you are going to pass, the department is going to give you what, or the college is going to give you a certain certificate, in order to tell the others, tell whoever is interested, that you were studying in this college for 4 years and you have passed all the exams, and this is the certificate that shows or proves this. So this is the classification of tests according to purpose. If we are going to talk about the test content, the material that you are going to include in your test, the type of things that your questions are going to talk about. Here we are going to talk about what? Two types of tests: theory-based test and syllabus-based test. So either here we are talking about tests which aim at testing or measuring the general ability of language, and here you are going to include in your test questions about everything related to language, about all the components of language: grammar, vocabulary, meaning, sounds, pronunciation, okay, and all the skills of language: reading comprehension, listening comprehension, speaking and writing, just like what the proficiency test, the TOEFL exam that we talked about in the beginning. The syllabus-based test, this means that the content of the test, the questions that you are going to make in the test, they are going to take their material or their content from what? From a syllabus that you have already taught for your student, just like as what we said, the achievement test, the progress test, and the diagnostic test. Number three, or the third feature of test, we talked about what? We talked about the interpretation of the results of the test. And here, the results of the test can be interpreted according either to a norm, okay? And what do we mean by norm? A norm means that a certain thing, and this thing is related to what? For instance, the scores of a similar group of students who have already taken this test. Is it clear? Just like what? Just like the TOEFL, just like the IELTS. And here we are talking about what? We are talking about the NormReference Test. The second type of test is called the Criterion Reference Test. So here you are going to interpret the results of your test according to whether your students have mastered the thing that you taught them or not, have mastered the material that you taught them before taking the test or not. Is it clear? So here we are having two types of tests according to the interpretation of the results, which are NormReference Test and Criterion Reference Test. Scoring, the fourth feature of tests, that they should be scored. So tests are scored according to two ways, or in two ways. That's why we are going to have two main types of tests according to scoring, which are the objective test and the subjective test. What do we mean by the objective test? The objective test is they are what we are talking about: questions, types of questions which have only one correct answer. Okay, for instance, the multiple choice test. In the multiple choice test, you are giving a sentence for your students. You ask them to complete the sentence by choosing one of 4 or 5 or even three options. So here you are telling your students that there is only one correct answer that you have to choose. Is it A, B, C, or D? What do we call the correct answer? We call it the key answer. What about the other answers which are not correct? We call them the distractors, and we are going to learn everything in detail about the multiple choice test in the coming topics. So why do we call it now objective? Because here it is the types or the scoring of such a test does not depend on the personal judgment of of the teacher. The teacher will not judge whether your answer is correct or incorrect according to his own point of view. No, it is a fact that one of these options should be what is the correct answer. So if you answer it correctly, you are going to get a full mark. If you chose the incorrect one, you are going to lose marks. Is it clear? Such a test does not require from the scorer, and we mean here by the scorer, the teacher who's going to score the test, does not require from the scorer and certain knowledge of the material that the students have have learned before taking the test. You can ask for instance someone to help you, and you give him that check these are the correct answer. If you find any of the students have chosen this and this and this, so they are correct. Otherwise, their answers are wrong. Is it clear? And also, they can be scanned by computers. Computers can do the scoring instead of the teachers. Why? Because the correct answers are already decided, okay, are already known, so it does not need any personal judgment from or personal or human human element to do the scoring. Like what kind of questions that can be objectively scored? The MCQS. What do you mean by this? The multiple choice questions, the true false questions. Okay, so you give statements for your students, so are they true or false? Or sometimes you tell them, you give them a third choice which is not given. And matching. So these three types of questions are called what? Objective test. What about the subjective test? No, here the subjective test, they need to be scored by the teacher, by a human being, not by the computer. Okay, and not any teacher. The teacher who has designed or put the test for the students. The teacher who has already taught those students, because only the teacher of those students can determine whether their answers are correct or incorrect. Just like what? For instance, just like the writing essays, okay, interviews or comprehension questions. So these types of tests, they need to be scored by teachers, and not any teachers. The teachers who have knowledge about the material that the students have already learned, and they are now being tested in them. If you gave the same test, for instance, the same essay written by a student to be scored by two teachers, you are not going to get the same mark, the same score, because each teacher has his own personal judgment regarding the writing, regarding the idea. The idea is presented in the essay, regarding the type of the mistakes that the students have committed, because some teachers will say that this is not an important mistake. Okay, the other teacher may say no, it is important. So you see, they may differ also in these things. So the scoring of such tests depend mainly on the personal judgment of the teacher. That's why they are called what? Subjective tests. Nowadays they are talking about semi-objective tests, which combine between the two. Yani it requires from the students to write sentences, okay, but at the same time these sentences or the answer to such questions are going to be limited. Is it clear? Limited in form, limited in the type of the information that the teacher needs. Is it clear? Just like what the short answer questions. Finally, test can be classified into types according to the method that the teacher employs in conducting the test. And here we are talking about two types of tests. We are talking about the paper and pencil language test, the traditional or the classic way of making tests, and in which the student needs a question sheet or an exam sheet and a pencil to answer. Okay, and here you are, as a teacher, you are going to measure or to include in your test different types of questions related to different forms, different components and skills of language, like grammar, vocabulary. You can also test listening comprehension, reading comprehension. Okay, the types of the test also, they are going to be different, variable, multiple choice test, okay, objective test, subjective test, any type of test that needs the students to write, to present his or her answer in a written form. This is what the paper and pencil language test. The second type is the performance test, and here language skills are assessed in an act of communication. If you remember, we talked about the problem of authentic context in which we need to test our language in. What do we mean by authentic? If you remember, we said that real life situation. So it is not enough to put your students in real life situation when you are teaching them, but you should also use real life situations when you test them, in order to make your testing effective and reliable. So here you assign for them certain tasks taken from their real life situations and ask them to perform. Okay, so this is the kind of test that you are going to have. What kind of performance that you are going to get from your students? Either they are going to speak, okay, and here you are going to have conversation test, oral interview test, or to write. You gave them, as a teacher, you give them a topic from their own life situation, from an experience that can happen to any one of them, and ask them to write an essay, to write a composition, to write a descriptive essay about certain people in their lives, about certain places they have visited in their lives, to talk about dreams, to argumentative essay, to talk about certain cases, certain issues they have faced in their life, and so on. So the speaking and the writing test can be performance test when you are putting them when you are putting them as acts of communication, when you are putting them in authentic context and real life situation. So here we have what we have talked in this lecture or in this class about the types of tests, in which we divide or classify tests into different types according to the 5 features of a test. Okay, thank you and see you.